arguments both ways maybe there, but in 2016 it was 16.3 penalties in the regular season, 17.1 penalties per game in the Super 8s, but then only 9.6 penalties per game in the semi-finals and grand finals. So a big drop off there, but an increase in the most part of the final third of the season. So it doesn't support fully what McDermott says, but does as it applies to the very, very biggest games at the end. And then last year in 2017, it was 16.1 in the regular season, 15.5 in the Super 8s, and then 9.3 again in the grand final and playoffs. So there's some support to say there's fewer penalties given in the semi-finals and grand finals, but there's no evidence to say that it's because the refs are changing the way they referee the games at all from just those numbers.
And a lot of it's a nonsense statistic in some respect because the games are so different. The opposition is so, there's so many other factors at play, and I always sort of think it just depends on a lot of the time get the acts that people go out and carry out that lead to penalties. A lot of the time, is it necessarily that the game is different or the refereeing is different, or is it just the fact that the players aren't possibly doing what are some of them penalties for them not getting back on side?
Well, also you got to remember you've probably got the fittest teams playing against each other at that stage. The teams that can last the pace the best because they've lasted the pace of the whole season. They've won more games than they've lost, and to win more games than you've lost, you usually have to give away fewer penalties than you concede. So, I mean, do you know what's remarkable about the one that signifies the big difference there, the 2015 ones for me? It was, oh no, that would have been 2014, sorry. But maybe, like, there have been teams in the past who've been willing to give away penalties and test their own fitness by doing so. But yeah, I can't say that there's a directive by the referees, but you do get a media narrative around Origin about Origin shouldn't have penalties.
Yeah.
So maybe that's being extrapolated out and applied for some reason to the Super League playoffs. But obviously, Origin's a completely separate competition to one, the Super League, and two, even the NRL that it wraps around. So maybe
am I surprised that McDermott isn't able to work out statistics, given that he can't often count how many people he's got on his own bench and use them? Probably not.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is a theory of what they call swallowing the whistle, either close to the end of matches or in bigger matches. But I suppose what you would expect to see then is the flip side around, because so many of the penalties, especially the contentious ones, are around the ball strip / knock-on area. So you'd expect the number of errors to jump up hugely in those playoff games if it's all about what the referees are deciding to give us penalties on.
There is the stuff that...
And they don't do.
Yeah, they've talked about on This Week in League a couple of times around in Golden Point how the whistle suddenly does disappear. And it's only this season where we have seen a couple, which has been quite, good move. But it has been historically where certainly the onside has been a bit dubious in some of the Golden Point where they have played Golden Point.
Yeah, well, there was the big one was the West Tigers Brisbane Broncos game, wasn't it? But let's not drag it out too much. I just think my final line on this is I think it's always far more the way the game is played rather than the decisions that the referees are giving. Personally,
and a lot of the time, I think it is the players making the referee make that decision more than anything.
Yeah, certainly, and maybe there's something more to that. But if anyone else has any other opinions or wants to take that conversation a little bit further about swallowing the whistle and stuff, please do get in touch, and we'll see if it fuels a blog or anything like that. If anything more interesting comes out of it, right? Midterm Dream Team, something that did fuel a blog post for me because I thought this is the easiest way for me to remember it is to write it all down. So before we go through my team that a few people might have read already over on the blog at superleaguepod.com, let's go through your team, Tim.
Okay, so I've gone for fullback Ben Barber. Matching you. Oh, well, exactly. Who else are you really going to make a solid case for? Where I have deviate possibly certainly from where you've gone is in the centres. Well, for some reason I've written centres down before wingers, but
That's fine.
I've gone for Callum Watkins because I think he's just the way he's stepped up this year. He's just shown his class, and the way he's led his team and his goal kicking will be an asset to my team. And Josh Griffin, as we've said before, he just has a game where he improves every week. Every game is his best game in a Hull FC shirt, and I think that he definitely deserves his slot at centre in this team.
I can't argue with those selections. Yeah.
On the wing, I've gone for Crazy Legs himself, Liam Marshall, and on the opposite wing, I've gone for Tommy Makinson.
Yep. Well, I think Makinson probably has had some impressive moments in televised games, but partly possibly because of him playing centre a few times this year so far, he hasn't flashed as much for me as often as some of the other candidates for the wing spots. But certainly you and other people see him that way.
It was a hard one, actually. I was torn between him and Talanoa for that choice, so he probably just pipped it just for the spectacular stuff, because I do like, I am a sucker for that sort of play. Which
highlight real stuff.
Which then brings me very much into my selections at half back. Starting I've just gone for two halves rather than a half and a standoff. I've gone for Danny Richardson, which is not a surprise because I've banged on about him all year. I think he's an exciting young player, and again, he showed this weekend with his try is just ability, and for someone so young as well, I think he's definitely Rookie of the Year for me, and he's definitely worth a spot in this side, along with Richie Myler, who at the time I didn't think was the best piece of business necessarily. I thought, okay, because he'd sort of drifted a bit in a Catalan shirt. He'd been there or thereabouts, but the way he stepped up and the way he has taken on this slightly different role, I think he's been the best half for me.
Fair enough.
In terms of the props, no huge surprises here, I don't think. Luke Thompson, starting off, obviously, highly capable, very hard, and just doing everything you'd want him to do, basically.
If anyone hasn't selected him, I'd question what they've been watching so far this season. Yeah. So
that'll be there is a couple, not to spoil too much, but there is a couple that haven't. Just glancing down, and the other one, Captain Steady Away himself, but I think we overlook how good he is, Chris Hill. So I think once again, just consistency and just coming out and just doing it.
Yeah, and his tackle success rate's almost 99%. Yeah, he's playing 60 minutes a game, and he still has that, close to the line footwork. He was on the narrowly missed out list for me. I think he's one of the players the most who will strongly be in contention next time we look at this around about the end of the regular season.
Yeah, I mean,
from my point of view, so I see the reason for his selection completely. Have you got a hooker?
Do you know I didn't write hooker down? But no, I do know who I picked. It was Paul McShane.
Okay.
I went for.
McShane's
and I think as much as anything, it's the support he's run this year has been great, and I think he's kind of stepped up a little bit, an extra gear in terms of where he's organised and probably bringing in. I think he's got a little bit more confidence where his place is in that team as much as anything else. So I think he's just bringing in other players, which I think is.
Yeah, there was a moment in, was it the Leeds game, where he kind of took control and didn't feel the need to feed it out to Gale. He took charge of the situation because he saw there was a play on for him to do that on, and that evidence is what you're saying there, I think.
And it was a hard one because I am a massive James Roby fan.
Yeah.
But I just feel that McShane's just about above him on balance, partly through longevity and resilience, having played those extra games. In the second row, I have deviated it, so I've gone for the Pearlish Ginger, Liam Farrell. Surprise, surprise. And I've gone for the slight controversial selection, possibly, even though he's been coming off the bench more recently, Mike McMeekan.
Okay.
So I just think he's got that extra thing for me. He just is someone who, when you watch him when he comes on, he does give that extra lift, and he's someone who's.
He hasn't particularly impressed me so far this season hugely, but I think maybe that's more of a symptom of him being so fantastic last year that he hasn't
and I fully admit
gone far enough this year yet for me, maybe.
It's probably that I'm biased and I always look out for him because obviously I used to play with his bigger brother. So I...
Obviously. You say obviously like we all knew that.
Have I not mentioned this one?
No, you are the man of 1,000 anecdotes, Tim.
So I used to be on the same touch rugby team as Dave, the B Winners. We used to play together, and I've played a couple of full contact games with him as well when he's helped us out down at Sussex. So and I've played with his older brother. So I've known him since he was sort of a 15-year-old ranger centre, and I sort of have kept a close eye on his career. So someone who greatly admire for the work he puts in, and he's sort of my sort of player to watch as much as anything.
Yeah, I think he's a cracking player, but maybe just not. He wasn't even on my close misses list this year. Who's your loose forward?
Now this was a hard one because I didn't think it was fair to pick someone who's probably played about 60 minutes at loose forward all year. So I actually went for Mark Flanagan. I thought probably one of the only loose forwards who's actually playing as a proper link-up loose, who's properly linking his sides, linking his halves, and putting a fair shift in defence.
Loughlin's doing that.
Yeah, but he's only played for an hour at that position.
That's not true. I've seen every single minute he's played so far this season. I would say he's probably only not played there for an hour, but that was his best game of the season so far, the Catalan game. But still, all the other performances, he's been named on the team sheet at loose forward, and when he's gone off or come on, pretty much. I mean, this weekend he came on sort of in the halves for a period of 10 minutes or so, whilst Tommy Maluluai had a rest. But anyway, I don't argue with Flanagan. You know I rate him highly. I talk him up as much as I can. So he would have been my second choice as well. So I think that's a fair choice.
I think it's something that was, as I was thinking about this, probably got thinking about into a little bit too much depth. But I definitely thought that actually it's quite a concerning thing from an England point of view. If you look at the World Cup in 3.5 years' time, that there isn't that natural loose forward coming through. So who is?
Oh, that's not how it plays. That's not how the game's played, though, is it?
No, and
the Aussies don't really have that. I mean,
but it is it is a concern, I think, that because you did see the impact that O'Loughlin had when he was in the England team. So to not have that and to regress to the way the Australians play. Actually, this is something we could do differently if we were breeding a couple, 3 of loose forwards who could challenge for that position.
Yeah, I agree.
Then it was something that would give us an edge and give us a different facet to our game. Because the way O'Loughlin acted at the World Cup, it was like having an extra half and an extra prop all in one player. And I think that's what we want ultimately. And I think it's actually something that Kevin Sinfield's performance unit that's aimed at looking at bringing players into that, between the Knights and the main squad. I think it's something that they should be concerning themselves with, trying to identify someone and 1, 2 or 3 players and saying, right, having a word with the coach and say, look, we need to develop them into world-class loose forwards. Thank you very much.
Well, I think in quote marks, our middles as a general group is an area to be concerned about, just because we've been so strong there. But it's kind of having Sam Burgess, James Graham, Chris Hill, Sean O'Loughlin so consistently as like world-class players in those positions has a little bit stopped us bringing some people through. Like Scotty Taylor's maybe not had as much game time as he could do, but I still think we've got some guys with hands, so we'll see how that progresses. One for another day, I think, Tim, the loose forward kind of lament.
Yeah, so let's come to your team.
You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of your 13 are in my team. So my team is Barber, if you've got 2, and it's kind of no need for any more explanation there. My wingers, I've gone for Liam Marshall and Joe Burgess, and whilst it seems kind of counterintuitive, because oftentimes they've not played at the same time, at the time of writing and still, they are the wingers who've played half the games of the season, at least half the games in the season so far, and have the best tries per game strike rate of any wingers. And what are wingers judged on, in my view, it's predominantly on tries. Yet both are also around the 100-metre mark per game in terms of making, the exit sets and that sort of stuff. And after Friday night, Burgess was
outstanding,
absolutely imperious. Yeah. In the centres, I've gone for Percival and Tupu now. Bill Tupu's a little bit of a personal kind of selection. He's been doing my Super League Dream Team so well in terms of the points he's getting that I felt like I had to give him.
It's not